I actually just saw Al Ewing at Thought Bubble, a couple of weeks ago when I did the show out there, and it was great. We've got such a bond, like Al Ewing and Mark Waid and I, and the whole creative team, Pepe Larraz and Kim Jacinto and Sean Isaac and just everyone that contributed to that. When I was at New York Comic Con, I saw Alana Smith on No Road Home and No Surrender. She was the assistant editor for the Avengers at that time, and now she's a full editor at Marvel. She's running Captain America and Doctor Strange and other books there. And we've got such warmth. Like whenever we talk about that experience, it was one of the craziest times of my life in terms of creative output and the sheer amount of moving parts on that thing. Like I can talk, at length, I'm sure we will hear about that process. It was one of the
That's my question.
wildest and most intense kind of production periods I've ever had as a writer, as a creative person. Like the amount of things that we had to keep track of. I I want to say I think there was like 23 Avengers in that story. Like
There's a lot.
and yeah, it was a wild thing. So I guess we can dive right into that. I can talk about it because we might as
Yeah.
well. We're already on the precipice here. So
The question that was my actual question, was just to take us inside the writer's room
sure.
where
Yeah, it was
you,
crazy. So
Mark Wade,
yeah,
and
what
Al Ewing.
happened was, so I was doing Thunderbolts and Secret Empire was wrapping up, and Tom Brevoort, who was the head of the Avengers group, he was my editor on Thunderbolts. He asked me if I would be up for writing Uncanny Avengers, which at the time Jerry Duggan was writing it, and Jerry was going to be taking over Guardians of the Galaxy, I believe. And so the original idea was I was going to relaunch Uncanny Avengers. It was going to be a different lineup of characters. We were going to keep a couple characters and then we were going to do something different. And I was starting to generate a team lineup. And then all of a sudden, there was a pivot. And this is commonality. This is superhero comics, man. This is what happens all the time. You have to be flexible. So they came to me and they said, good news. We want you to start writing Uncanny Avengers right now. Co-write it with Jerry because he's kind of underwater with, I think there was personal stuff happening and all kinds of things going on. And that'll get you eased up and then we'll relaunch the book. And I was like, all right. So I jumped in and we were doing some of the, originally we were supposed to co-write it. I think we co-wrote one issue. And then Jerry's like, oh, you've got this good in hand. You do it. I was like, oh, okay. It's mine now with this cast of characters that I didn't pick, but fine. So I started continued the threads in ways that I thought would work. I ended up writing it for 6 issues and then I was going to relaunch it. And then Tom said to me, well, I think I didn't have 6 at that point. I think I had 2 or 3 done at that point. And Tom said, new plan. We're going to be relaunching the Avengers from scratch. We're going to be reducing the line and refocusing it. Jason Aaron's going to be launching a new version of the Avengers, but we want these 3 current Avengers books because there was Uncanny Avengers, there was the main Avengers book that Mark was writing, and there was US Avengers that Al was writing. All 3 of those books are going to combine into an event. And I was like, oh, okay. And because you're the writer of Uncanny Avengers. And I was like, but I'm not really the writer of Uncanny Avengers. I'm Jerry Duggan's understudy. I'm the guy that kind of got, this thing given to me. And Tom goes, as far as I'm concerned, you're the writer of the Uncanny Avengers. You're writing an Avengers book. I want you to do this event thing. And I was like, great. What's that going to entail? And we knew that, Infinity War was coming out. So there was a lot of bandwidth for more Avengers stuff. And so I don't know who came up with the concept of making it weekly. I don't remember, honestly. I would have to track back whether that was from the top or whether that was something that I know I didn't throw it out there. I don't think Al did. Maybe Mark? I'm not sure, honestly. I would have
I
to
was
relook
gonna
at those
say,
emails.
was it Mark because he had already had experience doing the
Yeah, I
52?
think it might. I think it might have been Tom, and then Tom said, "Well, Mark's did 52 at DC, so he's got experience with a weekly." And I remember Mark making a joke like, "If you did 52, you would not suggest this because that was hell on earth. It was such a hard project to do." And we said, "Well, we're not going to do 52 issues." Tom goes, "We're going to do like, I don't know, 12 or something." It was like, oh, 12 weekly issues. Okay, maybe that'll be doable. And I had never met Mark and I had never met Al. And all of a sudden we were being thrown together for this crazy thing. And Tom wisely said, let's get everyone in person at the office. So they flew us out to New York, and we were going to have an Avengers summit, which was really exciting and cool. I had only been to the Marvel offices a couple times at that point. And I was nervous as all hell because I felt like I was the low guy on the totem pole because I wasn't even supposed to be the writer of the Uncanny Avengers at that point. Like this was sort of Jerry's book, not mine. And now I had been drafted into this thing, but I obviously wanted to deliver and everything else. So I said, we were all flying in the night before, and I said, can we all get together for dinner, kind of break the ice so that the first time we're not hanging out is in the room, in this boardroom, trying to jam story stuff for 8 hours or whatever we were going to be doing. And everyone thought that was a great idea. I'm pretty sure Tom was supposed to come. And then he had something come up and he's like, don't worry, you guys just go for dinner, the three of you. And so I'm going to this sushi place around the corner from our hotel. And I'm like, man, it's Mark Wade, like the guy who did Kingdom Come and like Flash and like 100 legendary, amazing things. And Al Ewing, who I've heard great things about, but I'd never met, and me. And how the hell is this going to work? And we had dinner together, and we didn't talk a lot about the Avengers because I think we were saving all that for the room the next day, but we were just jamming about our own creative careers and, things like that. Everyone was really sweet. And afterwards, it was funny because in retrospect, Al told me how nervous he was, and I didn't see it at the time. But we were both kind of intimidated by Mark and, holy crap, the pedigree here. How's this going to work? But I do distinctly remember. Have you guys ever seen Al in interviews and stuff like that? He has like the lowest timbre in comics, by the way, and he's British and he sort of talks into his chest a lot. And I will never forget. He literally said, "Oh, I know you don't really. I was thinking, guys, if there's a moment, and if you could tee me up, I've got another story idea I'd like to put in front of Tom." And we were just sort of uh, like I was so intimidated that we were trying to come up with an Avengers story, and now Al wants us to tee up other stories because this is something that you can do at these summits. You can sort of be like throwing big ideas into the room and see if any of them catch fire,
Is this a Hulk
And
idea?
Mark totally got it. And he was like, "You got it. Don't worry, Al. We'll set you up." And I was like, "We will?" Like, sure, okay, man. Well, I hope it works out. That'd be great. And so the next morning, I woke up crazy early. I must have been up at like 5, 6 in the morning. I was getting really nervous. And then we all meet up, have a quick coffee and a pastry, and then sit down in the room. Big whiteboard there. And Alana's got a notepad so that if we start chatting and she can take down bullet form notes. Um, and we start trying to figure out what the scope of this thing's going to be because we've got 20 odd characters and what can we do, that feels like an Avengers thing but hasn't been done before, and what villains are even possible. And we're just going down the list, and it was like every villain, I think Mephisto came up, and they were like, no, Jason's using Mephisto. We're like, okay, Kang, no, we're not going to use Kang. Okay, Dr. Doom, no, they're using him for this. And we were just like going down the list, and I don't remember who said, the oh, the Grandmaster, like the what do they call it? The things of the universe, the different
The elders, yeah.
Yeah.
elders of the universe. And I was
Oh.
like, oh, those guys are cool, the elders of the universe. And then it was like the Grandmaster. And then it was like, oh, we're gonna make it a big game. And I remember that classic Avengers story with the, you know, Hyperion and all those guys where they riffed on the Justice
Yeah,
League and all
the
the
Squadron Sinister.
Squadron
Yeah.
Supreme. And I was like, oh, we could do something like that. That'd be really cool. And we started sort of jamming ideas around it's a game, it's a game. Okay, but what kind of game? What's at stake? And people just started brainstorming weird stuff. And then it was like, well, the Earth's got to be at stake. Okay, but how do you make the Earth at stake? And all these kinds of things. And I got a little obsessed with the idea that why are the Avengers doing this? Like, what are the X-Men and the Fantastic Four and everyone else doing? And at one point, I think Mark or Tom kind of got a little snippy with me and they were joking and they were like, Jim, it's an Avengers event. That's why the Avengers are doing it. I go, yeah, but my like continuity based brain, I can't not do it. And I said, everyone else has to be like frozen or something. And that became the thing where we were like, everyone's frozen. Everyone is trapped like outside of time that they can't do it. They can't be involved. They are not able to physically be involved in any way, shape, or form because of the game, because of the rules of the game. And then we start generating these, what the game was going to be and how it was going to work and how the teams were going to mix together. And I said, okay, we need bad guys. And so we were kind of going back and forth. And Tom said, I like the idea. I've always liked the name, the Lethal Legion, but the lineup has never really stuck. Let's try and make a cool new Lethal Legion or whatever. And we started throwing ideas back and forth. And then there was this idea of, look, the Avengers versus another team has been done a million times before. What if the Avengers are like what if there's three teams? And then there was a sort of idea of, oh, well, what can we use? And I'm pretty sure Al said, what about um like the whatchamacallit, all the
Black
Thanos is
Order. Yeah.
the Black Order. Yeah, what about the Black Order? Those guys are cool. And Tom just looked at us with this really weird look on his face because he knew they were in Infinity War and he wasn't allowed to tell us. And he goes, "Yeah, we should definitely use the Black Order." And we all went, okay, cool. And then, like, maybe 5 minutes later, Mark was getting like, there's too many characters. There's way too much stuff to keep track of. We don't need the Black Order. And he literally sort of slides that cue card off the table. And Tom pounds a fist on the table and puts it back. And he goes, the Black Order's in. And we all gave him this really weird look like, what? And then Mark gets a sly grin and goes, they're in the damn movie, aren't they? And Tom goes, if they were, do you think I would be able to tell you? And we all just looked at each other like, whoa, here we go. It was
Yeah.
really, really
Look at
fun.
that.
Yeah, it was really fun. So that was spontaneous. That was us bringing them in. That was not any sort of movie synergy or stuff like that. That all just sort of happened. Um,
That's
and then just
awesome.
ridiculous stuff. We started generating those characters, all those fun kind of new Lethal Legion characters. The one that has become infamous that always makes me laugh is I was obsessing over, alien races in every, superhero universe and every sci-fi thing. They're always humanoids and they've always got, two arms, two legs and whatever. And I said, can we not just do like whatever, just a new race of, pointy-eared green skinned something? Can we do something weird? Something like not humanoid. And everyone goes, great, Jim, then what is it? I'm like, but I don't want like 5 arms either. Like, can we go like weird, like there's some weird cloud or like they've got, I don't know, tentacles or something. And literally on the whiteboard, someone just writes like tentacles, and I'm just like, like just different. We got to mix it up. And then later on, we were trying to generate powers for all these heroes. And I said, you never see like the Avengers never fight psychics. Like they don't have, that's an X-Men thing. It would be fun to kind of have a psychic, kind of battle them, and we could do a little bit of the mind stuff, like a, mental character or whatever. And then someone said, is that going to be the cloud or the tentacle? And I said, yeah, like a, like a mind tentacle or whatever. And then Al goes, mental tentacle. And we were like, yeah, like a mentacle. And then it just became this joke where someone wrote Mentacle, and it became like the perfect Stan Lee style name. Like that is such an old superhero villain name, Mentacle. And it just stuck, and we could not get rid of it. It was perfect the way it was, and we all started laughing. And now Al's, I think, used Mentacle like 4 or 5 times in different runs on stuff. He's used in Guardians and I think in Defenders and stuff. Mentacle just keeps showing up because we love this stupid character. And I hope they show up in the MCU someday so that I get a special thanks for Mentacle in a movie.
Check.
The other, yeah, right. The other, yeah, that was super fun. We were just generating all these goofy ass characters. And then that idea of, I don't remember who said, let's have an Avenger that never existed. Like that, they'd done that idea before with the Sentry and things like that, but can we put a twist on it? And that idea that it was actually going to be the daughter of the Grandmaster and all that kind of thing. And I said, well, her power has to be something that hasn't been part of the Avengers, because otherwise it's going to overshadow some existing historical character. And I said, what if, how does the Avengers get around the world? Well, they get around the world because they have a teleporter. And so I was the one who came up with that was her power ability. She was, and eventually the name, oh God, we threw all kinds of different names out there. I don't remember who generated Voyager. And finally it was like, oh, it's perfect. It's got that old school kind of feel to it. And it feels like she adds to the existing lineup of the old Avengers and has a purpose beyond just, whatever else, that you could mentally have her be in there and people would accept her into the mix because she added something dynamically to the crew. And so it was this really fun bit. This is, hours of back and forth and joking. And I think the only character that I wanted to like have in there I wanted to add more Avengers in there because I thought, man, this is my only chance to ever write the Avengers. So I was like throwing all sorts of other characters into it. And they were like, Jim, we already have like 20 characters. We can't add more. And I was like, yeah, that's probably true. But man, it would be cool to have the Black Knight, or it'd be so awesome if we could have. And then, but we did end up having like Hawkeye in there and Red Wolf and a couple other characters because there was that other book, the
Occupy Avengers.
Occupy Avengers, right? So we wanted to have them appear as well in some, kind of spiritual fashion. So it did end up working out. We had tons of characters in the mix there. And then we just started breaking it down. What were the sort of tent post events? What were we going to do in terms of that narrative? How are we going to keep, twisting it up? And by the end of it was like, I think 6 or 7 hours, we had broken most of the major story beats. We had figured out, how it was going to work. Al had come up with some of that brilliant stuff around the poker game, and that we were going to tempt, the grandmaster in that grand finale and all those kinds of things. He was the one who hunkered down on Living Lightning as a touchstone character. And the cool thing is it was all around. They had that initiative where they were going back and doing the classic numbering of the Marvel, books and things like that.
Yeah.
They were really looking backwards in terms of their legacy. So this whole idea that our legacy, what is the legacy of being an Avenger? And what if you had a second chance to be a hero? And kind of all things like that. It all kind of echoed through the story with Voyager and the story with Lightning and the story with, everyone, and how they were all kind of working. And it was amazing how organic that process was generating in the room. We walked away with a pretty solid plan. I think we had pretty much all 16 issues broke down as major beats. Like, this thing has to happen on this issue. We knew we were going to have 3 different artists and they were going to be drawing simultaneously. Like Pepe Larraz is drawing issue 1, and I think Kim Jacinto is drawing, like, I don't know, issue 4 or 5 at the exact same time. And so we started to build this structure where whoever drew a location or a thing first, that became the reference that went in this shared folder. Even if someone was going to draw it, for earlier in the story, that just became the kind of thing. And we had like a spreadsheet of all the characters, and we were keeping track. We're like, okay, Quicksilver gets injured here. So even though we're drawing the issue, but after he gets injured, before we draw the injury, here's how the injury looks and here's how it's going to go forward. Like, it was just this bonkers thing. The thing that really freaked me out was we finished that whole session. We had a great, day together, and then flew home that night. And about a week went by, and we had a schedule where once production started, we had to get a script in every 2 weeks. And the original idea was, well, we were talking about, well, are each of us going to write specific issues? And then we realized, well, especially at the start of the story, the 3 teams are still pretty separated. So we kind of need to write our own characters most of the time. And then once they start weaving together, it'll get more organic. And so all 3 of us are going to be writing on every issue, which was a cool prospect, but also kind of a nightmare. And so you had to figure out, well, how many pages does this thing? And I'm a highly structured writer. So before I write, I always do tight outlines. And then I will literally break down. If it's a 20-page story, I'll have a list 1 to 20. And I know what's happening on every page. This is that big reveal moment. This is the page turn. This is the 2-page spread. This is that, before I start scripting. And then in the middle of scripting, if a dialogue scene runs long or short and I have to cinch it up or push it out, that's fine, because I've still got that structure that I'm working from. And so we went about a week and everyone was sending happy emails back and forth about how excited they were to start, but no one was kind of firing that starting gun. And so I sent a sidebar email to Tom and Alana, and I was like, hey, I don't know about you guys, but like, I'm a little intimidated to just start writing a scene. I don't know which scenes are mine. I don't know how many pages I should do, or, I know it's going to be roughly equal. And the first issue's longer. Like, how's this going to work? If it was just me, I would do this page pacing breakdown. I would list the numbers and I would do whatever. I don't mind doing that for me, but I feel like a dick doing that for Al and Mark. And Tom goes, just do it and send it, and then we'll have something to measure against. And if people want more pages for their scene, or they don't think it'll take up that much, at least they have something to compare it to and say, you're wrong. I think that's a 3-page scene, not a 2-page scene. And I was like, yeah, okay. I don't have an ego about it. So I just laid out that first issue. Here's where I think the page breaks are based on all the plot points we have to cover. This is a 2-page thing, and this is the big opening spread, and this is what this is. let me know what you guys think. These are my pages technically if we follow this structure. And I sent the email out to everyone. And Mark, I think, responded first. And he was just like, you got it, Captain. I'm on it. And then Al goes, looks good. I'll start my scenes. And I was like, oh. And Tom sent me a little email and goes, see, it worked. And so when the second issue, we started production, Tom said, please do the breakdown. I said, okay. So I broke down the issue. Here's the pacing. Here's how it works. Here's all the stuff that needs to happen. And that was our production thing. Out of 16 issues, I broke down 13 of them. So if you like the pacing of No Surrender, that's my fault.
Yeah, that's awesome.
That was my master plan for better or for worse in terms of how that thing paced out. Al obviously did the Hulk issue, the big Hulk issue, because there was so much Hulk stuff in that issue. And I think Al did one other issue. I would have to go back and double check. And then Mark did the breakdown on our epilogue issue, the final one, all the different beats on that one, because there was so much, material we had to kind of wrap up at the very end and send people off to other series and other stories and things like that. I'm pretty sure Mark did that one. And he just said, look, this is how it's all got to fit, because we only have so many pages. And so, but yeah, I think 13 out of those 16 are my ridiculous architecture. And then everyone else sort of fitting between the things. And we Frankenstein monster, we would all write our pages in isolation. I would write my whole scenes. And it would be funny because I would literally be like, top of my page would be like, cut to, and then it's this happening. And then we would all send each other the pages. Alana would assemble them. And then we would read it as one continuous script. And then we would start to massage it. So it'd be like, that's a really cool line, probably a cooler line than that little panel deserves. Let's move it over here. Or that's a better moment. Let's give it a little bit more breathing room. Or, because we were writing our own teams, sometimes it would be like Mark would go, I think Vision would say it more like this, the exact same material. It's just change the cadence or adjust the dialogue just in tiny tweaking little ways. So by the time it was finished, most of the issues there were all of us. We were all incorporated on I know who wrote which scenes if I think about it or if I go back and look at the script, but we had our hands in every single aspect of it. And I think that's why it reads really solidly, because no offense to anyone that worked on 52, but they had separate writers on every issue or every couple issues. So, Grant Morrison issues don't read like Mark Waid issues, don't read like, Jeff Johns issues or whatever. And you can really feel, I think, the stylistic changes. Whereas our kind of goal was to make us like just smooth reading experience all the way across. This is an Avengers story, not a Mark Waid Avengers story, not a Jim Zub Avengers story or an Al Ewing one, but all of us kind of playing to our strengths as much as possible and trying to just make a continuous superheroic story that jived. And then the artists as well. Like, we were constantly sending reference out. We were constantly, jamming when the page roughs would come in. We would get on calls or we would just talk back and forth about what was working or to make sure everything was synced up properly. That was really, really important to us. And then things like the covers that Mark Brooks did on No Surrender, I think we all took turns, brainstorming cover ideas to send over to him for that. And I remember, Sean Isaac and I were doing Uncanny Avengers, and he had designed a new costume for Quicksilver. And when he saw that Mark Brooks cover, that really infamous one of Quicksilver like bursting right at the camera, and he goes, "Holy crap, that's the costume I designed. Looks so good." And we were just like, yeah, everything was crazy. I remember that first issue as well. We got an Alex Ross painted, ad for No Surrender. And I just thought, what the hell is happening? Like, this is the craziest bit. They did like an animated trailer and they're talking and my name comes up in this credit, like, I'm one of the guys working on this event thing. And it was so mind blowing to me because again, like I really did feel like I had lucked into this opportunity. And so I think that made me sprint more. It made me work harder than I ever thought I would because I wanted to sort of earn my keep that if I was going to be the lucky guy who stowed away on the SS Avengers, that, that by the end of it, you wouldn't think I was a stowaway. So it really turned out well. And Pepe Larraz is, one of the greatest artists in the industry, and he was coming into his own at that point. He was already phenomenal. I had seen the stuff that he had done with Jerry on Uncanny, and so I knew he was a phenomenal. And every time, he sent pages in, or Kim Jacinto, or Sean, or any of those guys, they were just doing the best damn work of their careers. And we gave them so much stuff, so many characters, so many battles, so many big moments. And we had to get those 16 issues done. We were about 9 months ahead. And so by the time issue 1 shipped, we were getting done 15 and 16. So it would be kind of funny because people midway through were like theorizing on what was going to happen, and they were like, "Oh, but they're going to change the ending because we're going to have figured it out." And I was like, "Guys, we couldn't change the ending if we wanted to. Like it was already done. Like and you guys didn't guess even close to what we were doing. So even better, Like that was the coolest part, was we had, so much kind of wild stuff that was going on at that point. And then, things like them announcing, "Oh, the Black Legion is or the Black Order's in Infinity War," and everyone's like, "Oh, clearly." It was just like, Feige telling them they had to put them in the comic. And I was like, Feige doesn't even know my name. I don't know what the hell you're talking about. We were just coming up with the coolest Avenger story we could. Or when they have the Grandmaster show up eventually in Ragnarok, and they were like, "Oh, that's why they used the Grandmaster." I was like, "No, we used the Grandmaster because in the room, we thought he was a cool character. It had nothing to do with any MCU synergy whatsoever." Um, it was just us having fun with all the toys.
Yeah, I consider No Surrender, like, people bring it up because, some people just read older Avengers books and they're like,
Sure.
"How is this?" And I'm like, "No Surrender," to me, outside of Avengers Forever with Busiek and Checo, I was like, "No Surrender's awesome." And
Oh,
like you
thanks,
like
man.
yeah, like you said, like, the breakdowns, like there were three moments like I remember, like obviously the Hulk slaughtering the US
Yep.
Avengers, right? You had
Yep.
Nadia.
Which was funny because Al's writing US Avengers, and
Yeah,
then he's also like just has the Hulk just totally paste them. And I was like,
yeah.
"Whoa, man, that's intense."
Yeah, and then you had Nadia's emotions with because you guys had to take out Jarvis, obviously.
Yep.
But like another deep moment was you said you probably um plotted it, was when Johnny touched the crystal and they didn't know what it was, and you saw that
Yep.
emotion. You saw that emotion from Rogue, and I'm like Rogue. Like if this was Gambit, I would understand, but like you could see that like Rogue was like, oh, this
Well,
is
in Uncanny Avengers, they were dating at the time. That
yeah,
was
yeah, yeah,
the
yeah,
that was the conceit that we had going. And that was a plot line that Jerry came up with, and I just continued it. And I had some very angry Rogue and Gambit fans at the time who were just like, "What the hell's this? Why?" I mean, Johnny shouldn't even be on the Avengers. He's Fantastic Four, and now you're putting him with Rogue. And like, it was just fine. I was like, "Dude, I'm just continuing a cool plot line. It's just a
yeah.
little bit of drama. Let, let
And
me
Johnny was
let me
messing
cook."
around with Medusa anyways. Before that,
Yeah, it was,
it's like,
it
hey,
was it was such a yeah, it was such a fun ride, like every little bit, and the interplay of the character powers, and the
yeah,
combining different characters in different sort of lineups, these little strike teams going around the world. That was something that I pushed as well. Is Don't get me wrong, I love New York City, and obviously that's the heart of the Marvel universe. But one of the things I said is, Marvel is a worldwide thing. I wanted to go into more locations. So I kept pushing these like obscure spots. Okay, they're going to go not they're not obscure. That's what's so ridiculous. Huge population areas, but just have not been seen in a lot of, Marvel stories. So it's okay, they got to go to South America, and they got to go to, wherever. And I would pick weird spots for some of the things because I just thought it would be fun. And then we would get fan mail from those countries, and they would be like, "We're in an Avengers story." And you're like, you forget how much this touches people's lives. Probably the most ridiculous one and amazing one was, I sometimes I get up my own butt about, like, you know, the reality of some of this stuff. And so I was looking up where fault lines are, like where major earthquakes can happen. And I know, like, Japan and stuff like that. I wanted to pick somewhere that was not a cliche, but that is on a fault line, and you could have a major earthquake, and that there would be, when the Challenger does his big crazy thing at the end, that there would be these, seismic buildings crashing and all this stuff. And I picked a random spot in New Zealand it was this like town that was right near a fault line. And so when we're doing this montage of all these places around the world, I think it's 2 panels of this one spot in New Zealand. And the people in New Zealand were like, "Why is this in this comic? Like, no, this isn't even a big city. This is like a town." Like someone on the production team must have family there or friends there or whatever. And there's a almost like a Daily Show comedy show in New Zealand, and they did a segment about the Avengers showing up in their town because it's in that comic. And it would because we mentioned it, because Avengers was the biggest, media brand in the world at the time. And so it's just absolutely insane to me, that kind of effect that you can have just by literally mentioning a place. When I was on Champions, one of my mandates was to make new teen superheroes. We made a Canadian Indigenous superheroes, and it made Canadian national news because there was a new Marvel superhero from, Nunavut, which is the northern portion of Canada, or we had a new superhero from India or things like that. And it's like, that's what's so cool about the Marvel universe, is that now it's taken on this incredible part of our lives that I never could have imagined. And even the smallest kind of things we do, people notice because they associate it with the Avengers, because they associate it with Marvel. And to get to do that, to be one of the writers of the Avengers as Infinity War is coming out, just insane. Like one of the craziest, wildest things. And the book was coming out weekly, so we were getting this dopamine hit every single week as new chapters were coming out. It was so cool. It was such an amazing experience. And to be there in the room, to go back to the summit, and we teed up Al, middle of the day. We were given the thumbs up to use the Hulk because he was dead at the time. Axel Alonso stuck his head in the door and literally said, "You guys are good to go on, the big green guy." And we were like, "Okay, cool." And then all of a sudden Al goes, "Oh, about that." And then Mark goes, "Al's got something really important to say." And Al just I'm in the room, and Al just pitches the Immortal Hulk in the room right at that moment. And we're just listening to him. And Al is very quiet and very thoughtful. And he's slowly walking through the mythology of this crazy Hulk idea. And he gets a few minutes into it, and he literally, the whole room is quiet. You could hear pin drop. We're all listening to him. And then he gets a little shake in his voice because he's getting nervous. And Tom goes, "You're doing great, Al. Just keep going." And Al pitches the green door and all the myth of, how the Hulk keeps coming back and all this kind of stuff. And we were all just kind of shocked. It was so cool. And it was so amazing to be there at that moment. And everyone was just sort of listening. And Tom goes, "Well, I'm not the editor of the Hulk book, but I really like what you just said there. So after we're done here, why don't you and I go for a little walk, and I'm going to introduce you to some more people." And Al was able to obviously leverage that into a run that has changed his career. And it's easily the book I signed the most at conventions, beyond like Conan #1 now, is probably the Immortal Hulk issue, and we all wrote on that issue technically, but I think that issue, because Al knew he had such a clear vision for that issue. So he writes probably 80% of that issue, 85% of that issue. And then we made it up in other pages on other issues. So he wrote less we throttled all the pages so that it all equaled out for everybody. But he had such a clear, cool, distinct vision on that thing, which was just ridiculous. Yeah, it was amazing to be there. It was amazing to be a tiny part of that little thing.